So for my research project, I chose the topic of the media's effect on support for the death penalty. And so a little background on the death penalty. In 1790, the U.S. established the federal death penalty, and it wasn't until 1852 that Rhode Island became the first state to abolish the death penalty for all crimes. 10 years earlier, Michigan abolished the death penalty for all crimes except treason, but Rhode Island was the first to include treason into that. And then in 1957 to 1972, Hawaii, Alaska, Delaware, Michigan, Oregon, New York, West Virginia, Vermont, and New Mexico all abolished the death penalty. And then for the states that remained using the death penalty for certain felony crimes, it wasn't until 1982 that states moved from the electric chair to lethal injection. As you can see in the map on my screen, it's mostly northern states and eastern states that have already abolished the death penalty, while southern and western states still have it. And so my research question is, does the media and social media have an influence on the United States population's support or opposition of the death penalty? And from there, I made my thesis, which was through crowdsourcing, publicity of protests, Twitter bombing, and online petitions, anti-capital punishment campaigns have used the media and social media to influence the repeal of the death penalty. An example of how a group did this was in 2013. After many years of anti-death penalty campaigns attempting to repeal the death penalty in Maryland, they decided to use social media to their advantage. And two ways that they did this were through thunderclaps and Twitter bombs. So thunderclaps allow Twitter and Facebook users to tweet or post in unison. And what that does is, on both Twitter and Facebook, they have trending columns. And so if millions of users tweet or hashtag or post about one thing, it becomes a trending topic, and that brings publicity to said topic. And Twitter bombs are when users tweet at a specific person or organization. What that does is it fills that person or organization's Twitter feed. So when you search for that person, those Twitter bombs are the first thing you see. And this supports my thesis because in May of 2013, Governor O'Malley signed the bill that made Maryland the 18th state to repeal the death penalty and the first state below the Mason-Dixon line to repeal the death penalty. Another example of this is Netflix recently released a documentary called I Am a Killer in August 2018. The documentary essentially, each episode follows a different death row inmate and tells their story about their childhood, what crime they committed to end up on death row, and it gives them a way to share their side of the story over the media side of the story. And one episode, particularly in episode 2, titled Killer in the Eyes of the Law, it followed Kenneth Foster, who was put on death row under the Texas law of parties, which is to be guilty of a crime, you don't have to necessarily commit the crime. A prosecutor only has to prove that you either knew about it in advance and didn't do anything to stop it, or you helped facilitate it. And in Kenneth Foster's case, the crime that he was committed for was capital murder. And what happened was he was driving a car and his friend got out, attempted to rob the house, and killed the homeowner. And while Kenneth Foster never fired a shot or killed anyone, he was put on death row because of the Texas law of parties. And the reason why this brought attention and publicity about the horrors of death row was because for states that don't have death row, especially my personal state, New York, and especially New York City, we don't hear about the capital punishment that much because it's not a big thing in our local news. And because of this, many Americans have a preconceived notion that people on death row are serial killers or heinous murderers, terrorists, people who've committed treason. That's who we expect to be put on death row. But this documentary showed that those aren't the only people who are getting executed by the state. It's people who haven't even murdered someone. There's also a negative impact of the media and the repeal of the death penalty. And this is shown in a survey in 2010 in Washington State that showed that there was a major correlation between people who watched or read or heard about violent crimes on the news, and then from there, their increased support for the death penalty. And this is because people see these violent crimes and they think that the way that they can be reduced is the threat of the death penalty. And so why is the national media and social media crucial in the abolishment of the death penalty? So Thurgood Marshall, who was a former Supreme Court Supreme Court justice, wrote a hypothesis that stated public support for the death penalty is a function of lack of knowledge about the subject, and if the great mass of citizens were provided with information about the death penalty, it would conclude that the death penalty is immoral and unconstitutional. And so the way that national media and social media fit into this is they are a way that can educate the public about, like, for example, Kenneth Foster's case, that like many people wouldn't have heard about that, but because of the national media and social media, just medias in general, people around the country were able to learn and understand what was going on in these states that do have the death penalty. Thank you.